So here we are on Parshas Emor, page 672, if you want to follow, which of course you don't really have to. And it begins, V'yomer Hashem al Moshe, Hashem says to Moshe, it says, Emor el Kohanim, say to the Kohanim. So right away Rashi is bothered by this. Like, why does he say to Moshe, Hashem says to Moshe, say to the Kohanim. Hashem could say to the Kohanim, right? Yeah. Or Hashem, right? Here, there's lots of ways of introducing this. So why do it in this way? So he says, Emor v'yamarti li'azar gedolim alakatanim. He says, when it says Emor, say to the Kohanim, you're telling the older Kohanim, the present generation, to tell the next generation the following. You're saying the Kohanim should tell other Kohanim. The older, like parents, should tell the younger ones. That's like, the Kohen, they have all these laws, right? And they're going to talk about them. They can't go into a cemetery, right? They can't marry a divorced woman. They have all different laws that they can do and they can't do. And there's a Kohen Gadol who has even more laws. And so the idea being is that Hashem is telling Moshe, who's to tell the Kohanim, that the older generation of the Kohanim, the adult Kohanim, should teach and raise the younger Kohanim to understand these laws. Because you can imagine, it's difficult enough for children to try to understand, unless they're living in a totally Jewish area, the difficulties of living as a Jew. Now, there's a lot of beauty as living as a Jew, but for a child, it's often difficult to do. Because, you can't eat everywhere, and you can't do everything, and on Shabbos, you have to keep Shabbos. And, we understand how privileged we are. But for a child who can't go to a ball game if they want to, or they can't do things that some of their friends do, or people that they've met, so it becomes a difficulty. Now, imagine a Kohen on top of that. A Kohen, for instance, can't go into a cemetery. So if a bunch of kids are playing ball, and the ball goes into the cemetery, you can't go get it if you're a Kohen. So you imagine a 6, 7, 8, 10-year-old kid, you're adding now to all of the difficulty. So here Hashem is telling Moshe to tell the Kohanim, the older Kohanim need to teach the younger Kohanim not only the laws, but the significance of the laws. Why this is the case, why it's not just a set of laws to make your life difficult. It's a set of laws that you choose to follow, even though they're laws, you have free will to follow. I mean, there are many privileges that come with these laws, right? It's like, you can imagine in the newspapers, since we've had all these stories now with royal wedding. So if you remember when Charles and Diana got married, so everyone, all the time in the paper, you'd see pictures of Diana, and she'd be wearing outfits that you just didn't think royalty would wear. It's not the kind of outfits that I think is appropriate for our women either, but she was dressed somewhat revealing, but not terribly revealing, not in a way that that people would stare at her in the street or would be shocked. But people were shocked because she's royalty, and royalty have a certain image, and they have to act in a certain way. Now, it's a privilege to be royalty. It's not a drawback. It's not a difficult thing. It's a privilege, but with that privilege comes a lot of rules, a lot of restrictions. So a person who's a member of royalty cannot go out in public and dress poorly or dress inappropriately. They can't even go out in public and just walk around. They have certain rules and certain things that they have to follow in order for them to be able to participate and to live their lives as royalty. But they also have the privilege of being royalty. Right? So it's the same idea. When we look in the newspaper and they have a picture of Diana, and she's dressed in a way that most people today would think is pretty covered up, but for them it wasn't. We get shocked by it. How could royalty do this? That's exactly the same concept that a Kohen has privilege, a Kohen has dignity, a Kohen has a certain position, and because of that position, they're expected to act in a certain way. That is what has to be taught to the children, because that's not written in the book. It doesn't explain in the Torah the idea of the privilege of being a Kohen. What comes along with it is what's called the noblesse oblige, they call it, right there. It is the obligation of royalty, the obligation of those who are of a certain dignity. They have also a obligation to act in a certain way. Right? And Jews have such an obligation, and Kohanim have so even more. And that's why it tells us in such a way that a Kohen has to educate their children to understand this idea. Now the question always comes up, so we may as well discuss it, even though we haven't really said anything. Is we know that Kohanim have a number of laws that they have to keep. And if you look here, probably one of the most common ones is the last one on this page, which is that a Kohen says shall not marry a woman who is a harlot, right, or has been desecrated, or they shall not marry a woman who has been divorced by her husband. For each one is holy to his God. So the fact that he can't marry a woman who was a prostitute and things like that I don't know if we question so much. But why is it that a Kohen can't marry a divorcee? Now, you want to say that society, today it's different. When I was a kid, society definitely thought a woman who was divorced, there was something wrong with her. It never happened. When I was a child, it didn't happen. Today, it happens much more, and we know very clearly there's nothing wrong with such a person, right? People make mistakes. They might not even make a mistake. People change, right? A woman could very, very soundly make a very, very good decision to marry someone, and 10 years later, he's a different person. Right? So there's lots of reasons that has no fault at all on the woman or even on the man, right? There's no basis, right? So, but when I was a child, it was very rare. Like maybe two of my friends, I heard of their families had a divorce, and it was different. I didn't hear about that. Today, it's not the case, and we understand it today. And not only that, the Torah understands it. The Torah, it's a mitzvah to give a man to give his wife a get. That is, that if you're going to get divorced, it's not a mitzvah to get divorced, but if you're going to get divorced, there is a very specific ritual that separates the two of you after you came together. And the Torah, if the Torah thought that it was a terrible thing, they wouldn't have a mitzvah tied into it. And so it's not a terrible thing, and there's certainly nowhere in the Torah does it give you the impression that a person who's divorced, man or woman, is doing anything wrong. Never. You don't find that anywhere. So then why is it that we can understand why a Kohen shouldn't marry a prostitute? I mean, a Kohen is a dignified person. They're a person who are looked at as being different, being special, being superior. So, and if the Torah, which in and of itself doesn't seem to feel that a person who's divorced is doing anything wrong, so then why can't a Kohen marry a divorcee? It's not like a prostitute. It's not like somebody who's done something wrong. So why is the Torah including that here? So it'll make a little bit more sense if we look at the rest of what the rules are for a Kohen. So I'll give you an idea of, a Kohen is not allowed to do a number of things. And there are a number of things that can happen to a Kohen which would make him that he can't serve as a Kohen. So for instance, one of the things if a Kohen has a physical flaw, he still remains a Kohen, but he is not allowed to serve as a Kohen in the temple. So what is a physical flaw? If he has one leg longer than another, one arm longer than another, if he has one eyebrow rather than two, like it goes all the way across, he can't serve. So you want to tell me the Torah says there's something wrong with a person that has one eyebrow? Not only is something wrong with him, who made him that way? God made him that way. And who made him a Kohen? God made him a Kohen. So he made him a Kohen so that he shouldn't be a Kohen? And there's something wrong with it? So here now if we can look at it in a more distant way, rather than talking about like a woman who's divorced, let's talk about something that's really more extreme, like the Kohen who has one eyebrow, and then he can't serve as a Kohen. So it has to tell you that there's got to be a different message here. The message we immediately presume is that there's something wrong with such a person, and therefore he can't serve. And there isn't anything wrong, and the Torah tells us there isn't anything wrong. So why is that? So I think we need to understand that what the Torah is telling us is that there is nothing wrong with any of these people. There's nothing wrong with a divorcee, and there's nothing wrong with a person with one leg longer than another. Certainly, I mean, there's no fault. You're born this way, or it happens through an accident, whatever the case is. This is a reality. But what the Torah is telling us is that human beings are flawed. Not flawed in that they have something wrong with them. They're flawed in that they're judgmental, and they treat other people in a very black and white judgmental way. So that if you go into society, and this is pretty much in most societies, although it's changed to some extent now, somebody who's different is looked down upon. Right? I mentioned sometimes that there was a law, which still stands in most countries, that a gay person is not allowed to serve in the army. So most people, you ask somebody, why is that? Why do you think that they made a law, like in the United States and Canada, that a gay person can't serve in the army? Does it mean that a gay person, it's presumed that they're not strong? Certainly not. There are a lot of strong gay people. It's got nothing to do with it. That they are not brave? Certainly there's a lot of brave ones. But what's it got nothing to do with it? So what is the reason? So most people think the reason is because you get in a lot of tension and anxiety, and someone might act out, and they act out when you're all men together and do something that's inappropriate. And then you'll have fighting and trouble. And that's also not true. That's not the reason for the law. The reason that they made the law, according to how it's written, is that the government believed that if you had, I'm going to give you an example, you had an officer, and the officer was gay, and he's not going to tell anybody he's gay because he's embarrassed. Okay? Now, I'm not telling you that he should be embarrassed. This is a fact. The man's embarrassed. The story that I'm telling you, he's embarrassed. Not going to tell anyone. And the enemy has a spy, and the spy finds out he's gay. So the spy goes to him and says, I'm going to tell everyone you're gay if you don't give me the information I want. But, so the government actually believes that a person is so afraid of being found out that they're gay that they will actually betray their own country. So therefore they said, we can't let gays in the army because this will happen. That's what that was the reason. Now today, right, it's not gay. People who are gay, for the most part, are not at all embarrassed about being gay. They parade in the streets. But it wasn't that long ago. Probably none of us are too young to remember when it was the case, where people who were gay were very embarrassed. Now, did anything about being gay change? Nothing changed. Society changed, right? The way people think about it changed to some extent. Whereas people no longer ridicule gays, and people no longer do the things they did. Not that it doesn't happen, it happens, but society has changed. Yes?
Do you think that society has changed because, for example, Ellen DeGeneres came out and said, I'm gay, because some of the stars,
Maybe.
celebrities said it, and then other people felt, well, gee, if they can, then
Maybe.
we can talk about it, and then, I mean, that
Yeah, it could be.
Society.
It could be, but the point is that it did. It seems to have changed. But then that was the case, because they were embarrassed, and therefore the government said that because they're embarrassed, they'll be easy to be blackmailed, and we can't let them be in the army. Right? Now, that's the really reason why, and it's very strange, right? It's a very strange reason, but it actually fits the idea, because the concept is that people treated people who are different very badly, and they would make fun of them, and they would treat them poorly, and they would do things to them, and you didn't trust them. A gay person was an example, and you see that it was a law that was passed by the government that says that gay people are embarrassed to be gay. That's what they believed, and today that's changed, but that was the case. So it's the same idea here. There's nothing wrong with a divorced woman. There's nothing wrong with a man who has one eyebrow. That's just how it is. You shave it, so you have two eyebrows, right? It happens. You're not stupid. You're not uncreative. You have one eyebrow. That's all it means. Big deal, right? But it says, but the world sees this differently. The world, when the common person on the street sees these things differently, and so the Torah is telling us that the Kohen has to have the perception to the world of perfection. Not that the Kohen has to be perfect. He's a human being. He's not perfect. But the outside world, looking at the Kohen, has to see the Kohen without blemish. Has to see the Kohen as perfect. So because the Kohen to the average person represents God, and God is perfect. And therefore, when you go to the Kohen, you want to go to the Kohen who represents God. Now, is it right for you to think less of a person for any one of these reasons? Absolutely not. It's wrong. It's against the Torah to think less of a woman who's divorced, to think less of a person with a deformity. It's wrong. It's 100% wrong. But do people do it? Yes, they do. Certainly less today in these areas, but they certainly do it. You see it everywhere. You see that people do it. It was when I was a kid, you watch television, divorced women were the butt of jokes on television every day. Gays were the butt of jokes every day. That's how it was. Today it's not. Yes?
Rabbi, isn't the opposite would be the case? Like, if it was in the Bible that it was okay to marry a divorced woman or whatever, have one eyebrow, that people would learn that they shouldn't be prejudiced. Like, it seems to me just encouraging that.
No, it's just the opposite, because 99% of the people can marry a divorced woman, and it's perfectly acceptable. While in other religions, nobody can. You can't have divorce. A Catholic can't get divorced because there's something wrong with having a divorce.
But
we don't have such a
saying
thing.
that the Kohen can't marry like a divorced woman, then it's legitimizing that there's something wrong with her instead of saying you can marry anyone, just like anyone
Is there
else.
something wrong with can anyone imagine there's something wrong with a person who goes into a cemetery? But going into a cemetery? No, right? Because what we're talking here about is that the Torah in 99% of the places tells us, how do you think of a divorced woman? You're supposed to think of a divorced woman as like a woman. Divorce has nothing to do with who she is. A person who has one leg shorter than another is a totally normal, regular human being. They should not be treated differently. In fact, if you treat them differently, you are breaking the Torah. You are breaking it. But do people do it? Yes. And therefore, when it comes to royalty, we expect royalty to act in a certain way. Should they have to? No, they shouldn't have to. But if they don't, we don't think they're royalty. When Diana dressed like she did, the world thought she was demeaning royalty. Was she? Not at all. But that's how it was looked at, and that's exactly the point here. The Kohen has to give a perception of being perfect, and therefore the common person has these feelings. So the Kohen, because of his position, has to go beyond the law. Not the Kohen is going and following the real law, not at all. The real law is there's nothing wrong with any of these people. But because of the Kohen's position, people have to see the Kohen with that certain example. So the Torah makes it that if a Kohen wants the privilege of being a Kohen, then the Kohen has the responsibility of presenting themselves in a manner that shows perfection, even though there's no lack of perfection otherwise. But it is clearly, people see that. And if you read through the things that are forbidden for a Kohen, these are all examples of things that the society, no matter what what law says, the society believes is something's wrong. Right? You have, right, and it's the only time that you find that this is done. And if you would do this, and if a person actually does treat any of these people differently, even though we take into account, they're breaking the Torah. It's not that you're that okay, there's nothing wrong with a divorced woman. She's like everybody else. But no, that's not the point. The point is, if you treat a divorced woman any worse than anyone else, you are breaking the Torah. That's wrong. You can't do it. But does it happen? Yeah, it happens. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to make a law. We don't have a law that says you have to breathe. There's no law that says your heart has to beat. Because it doesn't. You have no choice. Right? And we have a law that says you can't treat people this way. And that's the case. But in the case of a Kohen, similar to royalty, they have a certain perception they have to give. But are they really saying that this is the case? No, they're not saying that that's the case at all. So that's one of the big misnomers that people have when they think about it. Because if you look at 675, he says here that any man of your offspring, right, who has a blemish can't offer this, can't serve in the temple. What is it? A person whose nose has no bridge, has a limb longer than the other, he's blind, he's lame, he has a broken leg or a broken arm, who has long eyebrows, who has a membrane over his eyes, a blemish in his eye, dry skin. These are all examples of things that probably every one of us have had some of this sometime. We've had dry skin, we've had a broken arm or broken leg, right? Are we any less because of it? Yeah. How about if you got a broken leg because you were saving the life of a baby? Should you be looked down upon? Of course not. There's nothing to do with looking down upon. It's talking about the reality of how the masses, the uneducated masses are, and therefore we have certain laws to watch for that. But that gives you some examples of it.
So we know now that these people are not, quote, bad or really different.
We've always known it.
So why is the Torah still way back and hasn't progressed?
It's not at all way back. The Torah is the only book and the only culture in history that says that you have to treat all of these people with respect. Look, the Greeks and the Romans bought and sold women as objects. They were not. A woman could not be a citizen. A woman could not own land. A woman had no rights. right? In the Torah, women have rights. Women have the ability. They cannot be bought and sold like an object. Right? A woman is no different than a man. They're a human being. Only the Torah says this. No other book of law throughout history was like that. We can give example after example after example. The Torah is the only one that says you have to treat strangers with dignity. You have to go out of your way for widows and for orphans, while most societies would shove them off and allow them to starve to death. So the Torah is doing just the opposite of what you're saying. But it also has a place where it says we're looking at the reality of the situation. The world looks at things this way. We don't want people to look at things this way, but we know that there is such a thing. So if you look at things that way, you are breaking the Torah. It's not that you are just not doing something nice. You are breaking the Torah. Right? That's a serious thing. You are murdering someone is breaking the Torah. You look at somebody cross-eyed is just not a nice thing. Okay? You're breaking the Torah. And therefore, there is no other book that gives equality to women, that gives rights to women, that gives rights to the deformed, that causes us that we are obligated to take care of people who are sick, or people who are orphans, to go out of our way and support widows. There is no other society that did this. And the Torah doesn't need to update. The world needs to update.
I'm not arguing that. I'm just thinking of the Kohen.
And yes, the Kohen is not talking about a reality. It's talking about a perception that exists among people. And therefore the Kohen, just like with royalty, is there anything wrong, would you say that there's anything wrong for the queen to wear slacks? No? But we know that there is. We know if the queen wears slacks, it's going to be the front page of the newspaper. And the world will go crazy. Because the royalty doesn't do that. Now, would we think that if any woman that we knew did that on her own, however, in her own home, is anything wrong with that? It doesn't make her any less a woman. But with royalty it does, because royalty understands that people have bad perceptions, and if we are going to constantly struggle with those bad perceptions, we're not going to exist anymore. Are they allowed to have those perceptions? No. Are they correct? No. But do they have them? Yeah, they do. That's all the Torah is saying here. The Torah is telling a Kohen. It's not telling a Kohen that it's right to not marry a divorced woman. It's telling that if you want to practice as a Kohen, then you can't do that. That's the extent of it. No different than a Kohen Gadol whose mother dies, he can't go to the funeral. Is there something wrong with going to your mother's funeral? Does it make you bad? It doesn't. It's part of the position that he has. That he's not allowed to leave the temple. So how's he supposed to do these things? So the laws are looking at things on very different levels. There are the levels of law, there's the levels of customs, there's level of perception. That's what the Kohanim are doing. It's on the level of perception. What does that guy think about the priesthood? When he comes to the temple, who does he want to give his sacrifice to? To God. Who represents God? The Kohen. If the Kohen who comes there is a dwarf, there's nothing wrong with a dwarf, but that person who's there is not going to want to give a sacrifice to him. Should he give it to him? 100% he should. Is he allowed to treat him badly? Absolutely not. If he continues treating him badly, he will be punished for it. But does he think that way? Yeah, they do. People think that people with deformities and people who do things that are different or look different or act different, there's something wrong with them. And the only society that ever held differently was ours. We're the only one. But it doesn't mean that people don't feel that way. There still is. But look what goes on with marriages between families. And you tell me that's not the case. It's unbelievable, though. But when you try to get a young man and a young woman together, the questions that the families ask, right, either is there divorce in the family? Is there mental illness in the family? Is there people short-lived in the family? Like questions that it's pretty much ridiculous how far people go. The Torah forbids it, but do people do it? Yeah, people do
that. How many people do that?
Lots of people do that.
Lots of people.
Yes, I meet lots of times religious people and non-religious people when they're about to get married, and I meet with the families. And I know the questions that the families raise, and the families don't mean bad. You know, my son fell in love with this woman, and she's got 4 siblings, and they're all mentally challenged. I'm afraid if my son has a child who's mentally challenged, he's not going to be able to handle it. It's not necessarily it's all bigotry, but it comes up all the time. And that's just an example that perhaps we could understand. There are lots of examples I could give you that none of us can understand why people would ask such things, but people do. We know it. We've grown up. No matter who we are, we all have something different about us, and we've all been insulted and hurt because of it, because that's how people are. And there's a certain amount of having to understand that that's how people are, and then there's a certain amount of trying to change them. And we do try to change them, and the only society that does is ours. The world had to be educated that if you have a baby girl, you shouldn't kill her because you want a boy. Right? Do you think anywhere the Torah tells you to do such a thing? It's the opposite, right? But societies around the world did it. They don't want a girl; they want a boy. So they killed the baby girls, and it happened time and again. The Greeks were well known for killing anybody with any type of deficit. If they weren't physically perfect, mentally perfect, they would kill them. That's how the world was, and that's forbidden. You can't do such a thing. I mean, we know that. I'm not teaching you anything new, but that comes from the Torah. If the Torah didn't say this, the world would do this. So that's the frightening part, is that we think that the world, that there are certain things in the Torah that you don't need the Torah for. You don't need the Torah to tell you don't murder. What do we need that for? I know it's logical. Don't steal. That's logical. The fact is, if the Torah didn't tell us this, people would do it. Because it's not that it's logical. The reason we believe it's logical not to murder is because the Torah says so. Because I can give you a dozen examples of ways that you could at least consider that it might be allowed to murder. But in lots of ways. Or it might be allowed to steal. And, we see it all the time. When you have a case in the newspaper, which we've had, of a man who kills his own child because they have a disease that they're going to die from and they're in pain. But is that murder or is that not murder? So we need to know the answer to those questions. The Torah tells us that. It's not logical. We don't necessarily always have the logical answer. If a man a family is starving, can he steal money? Yes or no? How do we know? So there are many examples where you might say, yeah, it's allowed to steal money in such a case. How about if he steals money from the guy and now his family's not going to have food? The Torah, if it didn't tell us, we wouldn't know. And the world does not have the Torah, and therefore, if we don't teach them, the world did not know. And that's why it was perfectly legitimate in Greek society, if you had a baby girl, to kill her, because she's not human. She's different. She's less. And we wouldn't allow that.
And it's still fairly prominent in China. Mm-hmm. And that was 2004 when I was there. Still very common.
Okay, we then go into a whole section here, beginning on 682. It goes away from the Kohanim. It starts talking about the holidays. There's a whole section where you see it says festivals, Pesach, the Omer, and it goes into a whole thing. So since we're in this is the season we're in now, is the season of the Omer. We had Pesach, right? After Pesach we have 7 weeks until the holiday of Shavuos. We are now 2 weeks into it. Okay, so now we've got a little less than 5 weeks until Shavuos. So therefore, this time that we're in right now is the time that's talking about here, beginning with verse 9 on 683. Hashem says, the Moshe, speak to the children of Israel, say to them, when you enter the land that I give you and you reap its harvest, you shall bring an omer from your first harvest to the Kohen. You shall wave the omer, and it goes through this whole thing of the omer. Then if you go to verse 15, you shall count for yourselves from the morrow of the rest day, from the day when you bring the omer. So here's the idea of counting the omer. Every night we make a blessing and we say today is the first day of the Omer, the second day, third day, and we count the Omer. Today, we said last night, the 15th day. We are 15 days into the counting of 49.
And
yes?
my daughter asked, it's supposed to be brought every day, not for Omer, or only one Omer for the beginning?
It was that you brought it in, and then at the end, there was a special meal offering given.
And every day, not for Omer, or just one for the beginning?
No, you brought every day, but it was all put together and offered at one time at the end, right? So this counting of the Omer, there's a lot of questions about this, and since the time we're in, we can talk about a couple of them. Firstly is you'll notice that when we follow this commandment of counting the Omer, it's God says that every day you should count another day until you get to Shavuos, right? So you're counting each day. But you'll notice that what we're doing is we're going from Pesach to Shavuos. What's the idea? Pesach, we came out of Egypt, we were slaves. We were slaves. We were about as low as human beings could be. Right? A slave has no ability to be creative. They have no ownership. They have no ability to use whatever gifts they have. They basically are a thinking machine, a thinking animal. Like the difference between a slave in general and a donkey is that a slave can think. Right? It has the ability to think better. So the master tells you what to do, and you can use a little bit of your intelligence, but not much as a slave. And now 49 days after we were living like that for hundreds of years, suddenly now we leave Egypt, and in 49 days we receive the Torah, and we become what at that point is probably the most powerful nation in the world, and we're totally free. Now, anyone who knows any bit of history, you know that when a person's a slave, you can't just change overnight. It's a mentality, right? A slave doesn't pick his wife. He doesn't keep his children. He can't pick his clothes. Can't pick what he does for a living. He can't pick what he eats, when he sleeps, when he gets up. Nothing. Everything is dictated by the boss, by the master. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The master has total power over you. He can beat you. He can do whatever he wants. You have no ability to do anything. That's according to the civil law of the world, right? Judaism is a little different, but that's what a slave is. And now you take a people like that who are slaves, whose grandparents were slaves, whose parents were slaves, like they're born into slavery, and in 7 weeks you're making them an independent, free people who have the power, right, the power of the entire world. The Jewish people were amazingly powerful in 7 weeks, and they changed them. We look around the world and you see people who were slaves hundreds of years later still act that way. They don't get rid of that mentality. It's inside of them. And because the culture that they were in destroyed their culture, took away everything from them. Now they have nothing. So then the Jews in 7 weeks changed. The period between Pesach and Shavuos is that time. That we went from being just above animals, thinking animals, which is how we were treated, to being the powerful leaders of the world with the ability to choose to do whatever we want. That's an amazing accomplishment. That's done by the counting of the Omer. That every day from the time we leave Egypt, the Jewish people worked on themselves spiritually, emotionally, in order to become free people who were no longer carrying a slave mentality with them, and were able to be the kind of people that could accept the Torah and lead the world. Because you can imagine, you don't have too many leaders who are slaves. Right? If a person's a slave, they're not going to probably become president, because you don't have the ability to lead, because you do whatever you're told to do, and now you're going to lead. So in such a case, that doesn't happen. But here the Jewish people were required to lead the world. And they accomplished it in 7 weeks. The idea being is that we understand that in the spiritual world there are 50 levels from the beginning up to the highest level. So if a person gets down to the bottom level, that's a level of no more return. You're gone. But if you're at level 1 already, that means you've taken one step. You're beginning the process. The Jewish people, when they left Egypt, were at 1. If they had gone any lower, they would never be able to change. It would have been gone. They would have been taken out of Egypt. But because the Jewish people were at that point, just before that happened, they came out of Egypt. And every day they needed to increase their spiritual levels through their own efforts, 1 level. Every day they'd go up 1, until after 7 weeks, 49 days, they would get to the 49th level, and then the 50th day the Torah was given. That's the highest possible level. So we count those days. Right? So most people wonder, if we're counting those days, why aren't we counting down? We start with 50 and count down, or 49 and count down. Because really that makes more sense. Because we're anticipating Shavuos, right? Shavuos is when the Torah is given. So let's count down. The point is that's not what we're doing. We're not really counting down to Shavuos. We're counting up to rebuild ourselves. We're rebuilding who we are. We were slaves, and now we're becoming powerful people. So every person during the holiday, this time between the 2 holidays, is supposed to be concentrating on trying to improve our spiritual selves, to learn how to live with discipline, learn how to live following the Torah and the ideas of the Torah, so that when we get to that level, the highest possible level, we can receive the Torah ourselves. And that's really what we do during this period. So every day, by counting each day, it reminds us every day you have to work on yourself, to improve yourself, to get to that higher level until you get to Shavuos. This is an important aspect of it. It's also seen in the sacrifice. The sacrifice is offered on Shavuos is called a fine meal sacrifice, which means it's from fine flour that has been ground a number of times until it's really, the finest level of flour. Now, that's not natural, right? Flour that's ground, like when you go to the store and you buy white cake flour, right? It doesn't come out of the ground that way, right? You don't even take a wheat stalk and you go like that. It's not gonna be white cake flour. You've got to grind it and bleach it and do all of this stuff to it in order to make it, the fluffy, easy to use stuff that we use. That means there's a lot of human effort put into it. And that sacrifice is given on Shavuos because the human effort, it means our own human efforts are put into ourselves over this 49-day period until we get to Shavuos. Because the sacrifices offered back on Passover are animal food. It's very low level food. And then on Shavuos, it's the highest type of food that you can have, which is very heavy in work. An example is given in the Talmud where it says that the Rabbi Akiva and other rabbis used to have arguments with the Greek philosophers. The Greek philosophers had a different way of looking at the world than the Jews did, and they were able to live together to some extent, but the philosophers used to always come in to attack the rabbis. They used to try to argue with them. So one time they went to a group of rabbis, and they said, Rabbi Akiva, and they said to him, "Tell me, what's better? What's better, the acts of man or the acts of God?" Now, you tell me, what's better, the things that God does or the thing that man does? So why are they asking the question? So really, what they're asking the question is the Greeks believed that the human body was perfect. Right? As you know, you had the Olympics. The Olympics were actually done without clothing, not like today in uniforms, because the human body was perfect. They would perfect their body to look beautiful, and then they would do athletics, and the human body was a perfect example. Well, the Jews at the 8th day, they destroy the human body by circumcising, because we cut off a piece of the body. We say it's not perfect. How could we cut it off and say that the human body is perfect? Then why are we cutting something off? When we circumcise the boys, that's basically what we're doing. So the Greeks wouldn't circumcise. They said it's horrible. The human body is perfect. God gave us this body. Who are you to say that you can make it better by cutting something off? Right? That's what they asked. So whose actions are better? The acts of God, who made the human being, or the acts of man, who cut the human being and do what they do? That was the question. So Rabbi Akiva says, okay. He says, come back tomorrow, I'll give you an answer. Comes back the next day, and he's got two things. On one hand, he's got a cake, chocolate. Imagine a chocolate cake. The other hand, he's got a stalk of wheat. And he says to them, which would you like to eat? So he said, well, the cake, of course. And they said, well, then you've answered the question. The acts of man are greater than the acts of God, because man made the cake. God made the wheat. It's the point being that God puts things in the world and then expects human beings to perfect them. He wants us to finish the job. He gave us wheat. We have to get the wheat and grow it and grind it and bleach it and grind it again. And then we can make a cake. Right? You can't make a cake out of a stalk of wheat. You certainly can't eat a stalk of wheat. It's nothing like cake. So the difference between the two is man's actions. So he was really saying to them, God gave us the human body, and then it's up to us to finish it. He wants us to finish it, which is circumcision. And the Greeks were different. But the point is that his example was he took something physical, a stalk of wheat, and he said, what's better, this cake or this wheat? What would you rather eat? So of course we'd rather eat the cake. And that's exactly what's going on at this time of year. We started out like a stalk of wheat. We were the beginning product. We were at the start level. Now we have to raise ourselves up to the level of being the leaders of the world, the great Jewish nation. In order for us to do that, we have to work on ourselves. Just like we have to grow wheat. We have to go gather the wheat. We have to sift it. We have to grind it. We have to bleach it. We have to grind it again. So too with us, we have to get ourselves, we come out of Egypt, we work on ourselves, discipline ourselves, raise ourselves up, so that when we get to Shavuos, they offer a sacrifice, which is basically cake. That's basically what they're offering. They're offering this fine flour, rather than wheat, which is unfinished. So that's the idea, is that we're supposed to improve ourselves in this period of time during the 7 weeks. And that's what the idea of counting is. It goes on here. Okay, there's a couple of very interesting things. When we learn here about the holiday of Shavuos, sorry to turn back, it tells us, it starts out with the counting, and then it says, so it tells you that if you look on 687, so we got holiday, 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 then suddenly it sticks in the middle all of these laws of agriculture. All of these laws of agriculture on the top of a 687. And then when you get to verse 26, it goes back to the holidays. So again, we understand that the Torah is very deep, and the Torah has a lot in it. And the Torah has no extra word, no extra letter, no extra sentence. And also the Torah has reasons for why it puts what it does where. Right? But certainly, if I'm going to teach you about the holidays, I'm going to start with Passover, and I'm going to talk about Lag BaOmer, not Lag BaOmer, talk about Sphira, then talk about Shavuos, and then talk about Rosh Hashanah, and then Yom Kippur, and go through the year, right? And Sukkot and so forth. So I'll tell you about the holidays. I'm not going to tell you about the holidays, and then in the middle say, okay, wait a minute, and then I'll tell you a story about a goat, and then I'll come back to the holidays. I'll tell you about the holidays, and then I'll tell you about the goat. It's like you want to keep the same story. But here, right in the middle, it talks about holiday, 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 the laws of farming, holiday, holiday, holiday. What has it got to do with it? Why is it telling us this? So the commentaries tell us that the reason that they stick these laws of the agriculture right in the middle, right, of the holidays, is to teach us how to base ourselves in this world, to live in this world. Like we often talk about people. They often see religious people as being ascetics, people who are like living in the clouds. Right? They got their heads in the clouds all the time. They're not here in this world. They're not thinking logically. They don't understand how the world works. They don't understand how to do things. They're these religious people who live off in the middle of nowhere, right, and so forth. Now, the Torah is telling us that that's not how you're supposed to be. Right? There are, there might be a place for mystics and things like that. But if you look at every religion takes their religious leaders and restricts them. It takes like they can't get married in some religions. They have to, what do? They take them out of the city and put them up in the middle of nowhere in a monastery or an ashram, and they sit up there and they're not allowed to work. They take a vow of poverty. They're not allowed to own things. They wear natural, simple clothing, and they put all the whatever they do. They don't talk, or they do talk, or they fast. But they basically separate them from the world. They don't get married. They don't have children. They don't do business, and they sit up on the mountain and they contemplate the universe. And that's what basically every religion says. You want to be religious, you got to go that. You want to be religious, you can't get married. You want to be religious, you can't go to business. You want to be religious, a real religious person, you got to go sit up in the Himalayas and contemplate the universe. Then you'll be religious. So Torah here is teaching us all the laws of the holidays, which are religious days. In the middle of it, it teaches the law of farming. Because the Torah is telling you that if you want to be an observant person, you want to be a religious person in this world, you have to live in this world. You have to farm. You have to do what's necessary to live in this world. You can't be an observant Jew and not have money. But how are you going to buy a lulav? How are you going to have somebody at your house on Shabbos? How are you going to buy wine for Kiddush? You have to have money. You have to understand how the world works. You have to understand people. You have to interact with people. You can't go and say, I'm going to fast on Yom Kippur, and yet you have nothing to do with people. People need you. You have to help people. So the Torah is telling you, okay, here are our holidays. But before you finish talking about the holidays, you got to know something. The holidays are special days, and they're days to celebrate our religious beliefs. But if you want to be an observant person, you have to be here now in this world. You have to do business. You have to get married. You have to raise children. You have to change diapers. You got to do all of that stuff is a part of knowing how to live as a religious person in this world. You go sit up on a mountain and you don't work and somebody supports you and all you do is sit there and think about the world and about the spirituality, you might accomplish something. But one day you're going to have to come down from that mountain and you're not going to know how to act. You're not going to know what to do. And as whatever you gained up on that mountain, you're going to lose in a minute. You're going to come down and how are you going to get money? You have no way of making a living. How are you going to have a family, take care of people, be with people? You've never done it. You have no idea what's going on. You lose everything. I always give the example, and I've done it here before. It's like dieting. There's two ways of dieting. I mean, it boils down to two things. One way of dieting is you don't eat. You'll lose weight if you don't eat. You go on a starvation diet, right? And you will lose weight. There is no question, no matter who you are, why you're overweight, you will lose weight if you don't eat, period. Right? But you can't do that forever. You don't eat for 3-4 days, okay, you lose some weight. You don't eat for 5 days, you lose some weight. Sooner or later, you're going to die from that eating. You can't do that. Right? It doesn't work. Or you're going to not be able to control yourself. There's another way to lose weight. It's not as effective. But that's where you train yourself to eat correctly. And if you train yourself to eat correctly, you're still eating. But instead of gaining weight, you'll be losing weight. But you won't. But the first way, where you starve, you could lose 5, 7, 10 pounds in a week. But you won't lose that kind of weight when you eat correctly. But you never have to stop. If you teach yourself how to eat correctly, then the rest of your life you eat correctly. And instead of taking you a month to lose 30 pounds, it'll take you 6 months. But the one who loses the weight in a month because they stopped eating will gain it back in a week. Because you have to eat. You'll die. You can't do it. You can't starve yourself forever. But a person who trains himself to eat correctly will lose weight slowly, but will never gain it back because they've retrained themselves. So in the long run, who's the one who accomplishes the goal? Is the one who does it slowly, who does it by retraining themselves. So if you want to be spiritual, you have two ways of doing it. One is cut yourself off from the physical world and just do spiritual things. And it'll work. You'll be spiritual. But you can't do that forever. Sooner or later, you're going to come down from that mountain. Just like someday you're going to eat. And you won't know how to handle yourself, and you'll do all types of crazy things. You'll lose everything you gained. On the other hand, you can become spiritual by being involved in the world, but using discipline. Just like a person who retrains himself how to eat can still eat things that perhaps they shouldn't eat, but they eat less of it. They eat a certain amount, in certain ways, at certain times. And then they're able to take care of themselves. So too in the spiritual world. Right? The spiritual world says, I can eat, but I can only eat certain things. I can have relations, but I can have relations with certain people. I can do all of these different things, but there's rules as to how to do it. So that in the end, I can live my life that way, and I'll be spiritual forever. The other person won't. And that's really the message is telling you. You want to keep out my holidays, Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot, that's great. But you should understand that if you want to really gain from this, you have to be involved in the world. You have to have a job. You have to have a family. You have to take care of sick people. You got to change diapers. You got to clean up from people. That's part of being a religious person. It's not sitting in some ivory tower and contemplating the universe. That's not the idea at all. And that's why it does it this way. A similar thing happens at the end of the parsha. We have a very strange story here. If you look at on 693, it's called the blasphemer, and the way we usually speak, and we have an idea in Torah that when a person speaks, you should always speak in a nice way. You should try not to speak. You certainly shouldn't be coarse in how you speak. You certainly shouldn't, swear and speak in such a manner. That's not appropriate. But you also should try to speak positively. Now, it's not a law, they have to be positive, but you see the Torah does it. Like where the Torah could say something, like this animal is treif. Right? That's a negative word. Right? This animal is treif. But instead it doesn't. It uses extra words and it says this animal is not kosher. In other words, it's like instead of labeling it as being treif, it's like the difference between telling a child you're a bad child or you did something bad. Right? It's a very big difference. So the Torah is very strict about it. It also sometimes will use words in a way that what we call euphemisms. They'll say one word but they'll mean something else. Like for instance, when the rabbis would talk about blind people, rather than calling them blind, which was a negative way of saying it, because it means they can't see, they'd say the person sees too much light. The expression was sagi noar, too much light. This person sees too much light. Because what happens when you see too much light? You see nothing, right? You're blind. But instead of saying he sees nothing, they say he sees too much light. Because they wanted to say it in a more positive manner. So here also we're talking about the blasphemer, and I'll explain what that is. But you know the word blasphemy means that he curses God. So the rabbis never call him the one who curses God. The rabbis call him the one who blesses God. But everyone knows that it means the opposite, because they don't even say. You don't even want to say the words to curse God. I guess it's like, if you're in a marriage, you don't want to even say to your spouse, talk about having an affair. Not that you have an affair. You're not going to have an affair. But you don't even want to talk about it. You don't even, I was talking to somebody once, and they were telling me how that whenever they played a certain song that was about divorce, their mother used to get upset and make their father take it off. They weren't contemplating a divorce. They had a wonderful marriage, but it bothered her to hear it. So they didn't want to say it. There's certain things you don't talk about. So here they don't want to talk about a person who curses God. They call him the blesser of God. But we know what it means. So in this section, it begins by saying, Ben Isha Yisraeli. So you have a man who is the son of a Jewish woman. Now, why it says it that way is because her husband wasn't Jewish. Right? This is one of the first instances of that. So it says his mother was Jewish. He's the son of a Jewish woman. Usually you don't give genealogy after a woman. So they're telling you that there's something missing with the father. The father wasn't Jewish. Mohu ben Ish Mitri, and his father was Egyptian. B'soch ben Yisrael, and he lived with the Jews. Right? This guy left Egypt with his mother, who had been intermarried. And then it says, Vayinatzu b'machana, there was a fight in the camp, Ben ha-Yisraelit, V'ish ha-Yisraeli, and it was between this man whose mother was Jewish and father not, and another Jewish man. And then it goes on, and it says that the son of the son of the woman who wasn't who was married to a non-Jew at one point, it says as Hashem ha'Beikalel, he says the name of God and he curses God. In other words, he got into a fight and he curses the guy. He says, God should do this to you, but he uses the name of God. All right, he curses God. Jewish people never heard at this point in history somebody curse God. They like to actually, and they just saw God, right? I mean, imagine, here these people are, they were in Egypt, they had all these plagues, they saw it, the Red Sea split, they're about to get the Torah. They know there's a God. For a guy to go and say, God should destroy you, or, curse God in some way, it's a horrible thing, because this is real, right? And he does it. So they don't know, what do you do to such a guy? I mean, it's wrong. You can't do that. You can't be a blasphemer. So what do you do? So they didn't know. They didn't know what the punishment was. Right? What was according to Jewish law? Because everything's very new. So they do. It says so they went to Moshe. They took the guy. They locked him up, and they went to Moshe. Right? And they asked Moshe, what do we do? So Moshe doesn't know. So it says Hashem tells Moshe here in verse 13, remove the blasphemer to the outside of the camp. Go take him outside, right? And all those who heard him shall lean their hands upon his head, and the entire assembly shall stone him. Right? So you should be stoned. And the children of Israel you should speak, saying, any man who will blaspheme his God shall bear his sin. One who pronounces blasphemy in the name of Hashem shall be put to death, and so forth. And then it's okay. Now, so that's the blasphemer, and it tells you he should be punished. Now they're going to kill him, but it doesn't. But then something happens. Where do they kill him? If you look on the next page, verse 23, Moses spoke to the children of Israel, and they took the blasphemer to the outside of the camp, and they stoned him to death. And the children of Israel did as Hashem had commanded Moses. Okay? So here we just finished verse 16, saying that you should kill him. And then in verse 23, it says that they killed him. What happens between verse 17 and verse 23? What's going on? Verse 17 should be, God says you should kill him. The next verse, they killed him, but it doesn't. Then you have this whole long thing. And if a man strikes mortally any human life, right? If somebody hits another person and the guy dies, for doing that, you should be put to death. And a man who kills an animal has to pay for an animal. And if a man makes a wound to somebody, he has to pay for it. And if he takes out his eye, he has to pay for it. It has all of these different rules about life. Right? If you take away a person's life, you'll be killed. If you injure somebody else, you have to make restitution to that person. Right? So forth and so on. And then it says they took out the blasphemer and they killed him. What's this doing in the middle? Again, God stuck this in the middle. It's like, where am I going to put the laws of somebody killing somebody? Where should I put them? Oh, I know. I'm going to stick them in the middle of the story. And it has nothing to do with the story. I'm going to stick it right here. It makes no sense. So the point is as follows. Here we have an instance where somebody does something wrong, and God tells the people, you have to kill him. You have to do it. So remember, you're living in a bloodthirsty world back then. The pagans killed people. They killed their children. Life was very cheap to pagans. And you have the Jews living in Egypt with pagans. So now they come out and they're Jews, and they have to act like Jews, and they have the Torah. And what do they got to do now? So now they're told you have to act like a pagan. You got to kill somebody. So back inside the feelings, life is cheap. With pagans, life was cheap. Didn't mean anything. So God says, okay, you're commanded to kill. But before you kill somebody, you have to know how serious this is, what you're going to do. It's like in the United States, they have a law, or even here, we're going to make a capital punishment. If you kill somebody, you will be killed. Right? Let's just say that's a law in New York State. It's not, but let's say it is. That you will be killed. Or in Ontario, you kill somebody, you will be killed. Okay? So that's the law. So the Torah is telling us that you have to know, before you in any way injure someone, you have to know that human life is a big deal. There are times when you do have to kill, but you should realize how significant and important that is. It's not like you have to pay $1 and you have to kill, and it's the same thing. No big deal. It's a big deal. To hurt someone, to kill someone, even if they're a bad person, is a big deal. Don't be insensitive to that. So God says, yes, sadly, this man did something that he deserves to die. I gave him life, and I'm telling you, he doesn't deserve to live anymore because of what he did. But before you do what's right, you got to know that killing somebody, even if it's the right thing to do, is a big deal. It's hard. You should think about it. You should not get any joy out of it. It should bother you that it does it. And then, when you feel that way, then you're allowed to do it. But if you don't think human life's a big deal, and it doesn't bother you, and it doesn't make you feel bad to have to do this, then you can't do it. You can't do it. It's like the Talmud has an expression. It says that a Talmud Chacham has to strike back. If somebody insults a rabbi, and then the rabbi is obligated to strike back. And the Talmud says that a person insults a Talmud Chacham like a rabbi, he has to strike back like a snake. Like, snakes, they don't play around, right? They're not very patient. If you go near a snake and he's not happy, he'll bite you and you'll die. And he doesn't fool around. And that's how a rabbi should be. If somebody insults a rabbi, you should bite him right back. You should, and it's serious, right? But that's not what it means. Because you'd say, if somebody insults a rabbi, you should bite him like a lion, right? Why say a snake? So the Talmud tells us a snake. The commentaries say about this Talmud, a snake is the one animal in the world, because of the curse to the snake, he has no taste buds. A snake eats to nourish itself. That's the only reason. Now, you and I eat to nourish ourselves, but it doesn't hurt to nourish ourselves with chocolate cake, right? And it's, we like to taste good and nourish ourselves. Both are good. You don't have, don't. It's not like they used to say in the future they're going to have these pills, and you take the pills and you don't have to eat food anymore, right? You ever wonder why that didn't happen? Because we want to eat food. We don't want to eat pills. So, because we have taste buds, but snakes don't have taste buds. Snakes only eat because they have to eat. They get no pleasure out of eating. So when a snake bites you, he doesn't get any pleasure out of biting you. And that's the rule. When a rabbi is insulted by someone, he has to strike back. He has to stand up for his beliefs. You can't let someone belittle you, but you can't get any pleasure out of it. Like a snake doesn't get pleasure out of biting, you can't get pleasure out of it. If you get pleasure out of it, you can't do it. Right? That's the same idea here. There are times when you have to kill, when somebody's life is so bad that let them live is bad for them and bad for you. And there are times when God tells us you have to kill, but never treat it lightly. Life and death is important. A person's life is holy. A person's life has meaning. No matter how bad someone is, you should always regret having to kill someone.